consistency does not mean perfection. There will be missed days and interruptions. That is part of the process. What matters more is how you return. Do you resume where you left off, adjust, and continue? Or does one interruption lead to a longer pause? Are you ready to get back to what you love after knee replacement? The Total Knee Success Podcast is your trusted guide with practical tips, evidence-based strategies, and no fluff. It's not personal medical advice, just solid education to help you manage pain, regain mobility, and get back to living the life you love. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Total Knee Success Podcast. I'm Michelle. In the last episode, we talked about strength, why it plays such a central role in your outcome after knee replacement, and how your muscles influence what you're able to do. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why consistency, not intensity, is what drives progress after knee replacement, and how to approach your rehabilitation in a way that supports steady, meaningful improvement over time. There's a common belief that doing more, pushing harder, doing longer sessions, or having a really strong day of exercise is what leads to better results. This often shows up as doing more than your body is ready to repeat, longer sessions, higher effort, or pushing to the point where the next day you need to pull back significantly. And it makes sense. In many areas of life, effort and intensity feel like the path forward. But rehabilitation after knee replacement doesn't work that way, especially in the earlier phases of rehabilitation. What matters most is not what you do once, but what you're able to repeat. This is where consistency becomes such an important concept, because your body adapts based on repeated exposure over time, across strength, movement, and how your body learns to trust the new joint. I see this pattern frequently in clinical practice. Someone has a day where they feel good, so they do more repetitions, more activity, maybe even pushing into discomfort. And the next day, things feel worse. So they pull back, rest more, and do less. And then when they feel better again, they try to make up for it. This creates a cycle of doing a lot and then doing very little. As you hear this, you might already recognize that pattern in your own week, how it shows up in your routine, your decisions, and how you respond on both the good days and the harder ones. And over time, that cycle tends to slow progress. Not because effort is the problem, but because the body doesn't get the consistent input it needs to adapt. A different pattern looks more like this. The effort is more moderate, but it's repeated. Exercises are done regularly, activity is built gradually, and even on days where things feel a little harder, there's still some level of engagement. That doesn't mean pushing through pain that continues to worsen or doesn't settle. It means adjusting and continuing. And this is where consistency starts to take shape. Not as doing the same thing perfectly every day, but as continuing to show up in a way that matches your current capacity. One way to think about this comes from the habit literature. James Clear in Atomic Habits and B.J. Fogg in Tiny Habits both emphasize that consistency comes from making actions repeatable, not making them bigger. In rehabilitation, that doesn't mean doing random or easier exercises. It means doing the right exercises for you in a way that allows you to repeat them consistently. For some people, that might mean breaking a program into smaller parts throughout the day or using a simple checklist to stay organized. For others, it might mean tying exercises to a consistent part of their routine, like after a meal or before a walk, so they happen regularly without having to rethink them each time. In the earlier phases of rehabilitation, this can sometimes mean doing smaller amounts of exercise more than once a day. That's often intentional. Early on, the focus is on helping your knee move, reducing stiffness, and building tolerance to activity. And shorter, more frequent bouts can support that without overloading the joint all at once. As you move further along, that structure changes. Exercise becomes more about building strength with enough recovery between sessions, rather than spreading it out across the day. If you're not sure where to start, choosing one consistent point in your day to anchor your exercises can make this much easier to follow through on. From a psychological standpoint, change comes from accumulation. Strength through repeated loading, movement through practice, and more efficient patterns over time. And this is why intensity alone is not the driving factor. In the earlier phases of rehabilitation, When intensity is too high too soon, meaning it's not something you can come back to the next day, it can actually interrupt progress. As your capacity improves, intensity becomes more important, but it's structured differently. Instead of trying to repeat the same effort every day, it's balanced across days so that harder work and recovery support each other. If an exercise session leads to a significant increase in pain or swelling, it's a sign to pull back and adjust what you're doing. When that happens, consistency, unfortunately, is disrupted. So instead of building momentum, the process resets. If you notice new or severe pain, especially if it feels different from what you've been experiencing, it's important to reach out to your surgeon or care team to make sure everything is on track. Now, intensity still does have a role, but only at a level you can tolerate and come back without a setback. The more useful guide day to day is whether what you're doing is repeatable. If you can come back to it the next day, you're in the right range, especially in early rehab. If you can't, it was likely too much. That's the shift, from maximizing one effort to building something that carries over across days. Progress becomes more predictable because the input is consistent. Not every day will feel the same. On harder days, adjust rather than stop. Smaller range, fewer repetitions, or a slower pace, so the pattern continues and strength can build over time. Before going further, it's worth pausing for a moment and thinking about your own situation. What are you working toward right now? What is one thing you would like to be easier or feel more natural in your day? When you think about the exercises or activity you're doing, does it feel clearly connected to that? Another way to understand consistency comes from the work of William Miller and Stephen Rolnick, who studied why people follow through on health behaviors and why they don't. One of the key things they found is that people are more likely to stay consistent when what they're doing connects to something they actually care about, not just something they've been told to do. You can see this pretty clearly in real life. Someone wants to get up from a chair more easily. They might say, I can get up from my chair, but it's a whole production. Hands on the armrests, a little rocking, maybe a pause halfway up, and they're not wrong. It works. It just doesn't feel strong or controlled yet. So instead of thinking, I need to do all of my exercises perfectly once a day, the focus shifts a little. Every time they stand up, it becomes practice. Maybe they use their hands a little less. Maybe they slow it down just enough to feel the effort in their legs. Not dramatic, not exhausting, just consistent. And over time, something starts to change. It's not one big moment. It's more like one day they stand up and they realize, that's a little easier today. The same thing shows up with walking. Someone might say, I want to get back to walking around the block. Right now, that sounds like a lot. Instead of waiting for the day where everything feels perfect, they go a shorter distance, something they can repeat, something they can come back to the next day without needing 2 days off afterward. Sound familiar? And as that builds, the distance builds with it. Not from one big push, but from what keeps happening again and again. That's really the shift. Not how much can I do today, but what can I do today that I can come back to tomorrow. When that connection is clear, consistency becomes easier. Not because the exercises change, but because they actually feel connected to how they want to move in their day. With a general rhythm, it's easier to know what to expect, and follow through improves without needing to decide each day whether to push or rest. Another important point is that consistency does not mean perfection. There will be missed days and interruptions. That is part of the process. What matters more is how you return. Do you resume where you left off, adjust, and continue? Or does one interruption lead to a longer pause? Do you just toss it all out the window? Those small decisions influence how continuous the overall process becomes. And over time, that continuity is what drives change. If you're trying to figure out whether you're on the right track, one useful question is whether what you're doing feels repeatable on a regular basis. If the answer is yes, even if the effort feels modest, you're likely building in the right direction. If the answer is no, and each session feels difficult to recover from, that's often a sign that the current level of intensity may be higher than what your body can consistently tolerate right now. Adjusting that can help restore consistency. This is also where working with a physical therapist can be helpful. You knew I was going to say that. They can help you determine how much is enough to create change without disrupting your ability to come back and do it again the next day. That balance is not always obvious, especially when you're navigating symptoms that vary from day to day, but it's a key part of making progress feel steady rather than unpredictable. If you're looking for additional educational support as you move through each stage, you can find that in the Total Knee Success Insider. It's free, delivered directly to your inbox, and designed to follow you through each phase, whether you're preparing for surgery or working to regain strength and mobility after surgery. If that would be helpful, you can find more information in the show notes and join the Total Knee Success Insider newsletter. In the next episode, we're going to take this one step further. We'll talk about what physical therapy actually does and why it's more than just exercises. Because understanding that helps connect everything we've talked about so far: strength, consistency, and how progress is guided over time. As you move forward from this episode, consider this idea. Progress builds after a knee replacement when what you do today is something you can come back to tomorrow. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Michelle, and this has been the Total Knee Success Podcast. This podcast is for educational purposes only. Discover more at totalkneesuccess.com, and be sure to subscribe and share, because every step forward takes you closer to living the life you love.